Hi there, it's Natasha and thank you so much for joining me today. I am going to be making a bit of a fun fold card out of heart shapes today. This is just something a little bit different and pretty fun and easy to create. So I just have some white cardstock here. This happens to be the 80-pound Nina Solar white cardstock, and I'm using that because you don't want to have a really heavy cardstock for this because we are going to be doing some folding. So I didn't want to use the 110-pound Recollections or Nina paper that I have. So this is the 80-pound paper, and I am just cutting these down into squares that I'm not even measuring. They're not even squares. And then all I'm doing is just scoring, so roughly down the middle and then roughly down, turning it and then down the middle the other way. So you'll see when I end up folding this, I know that sounds confusing, but when I end up folding this, I don't even get a square line. It's not matching up or anything because I'm going to be cutting some shapes out of this. So all I want is a piece of cardstock that is kind of folded in four. So I'm going to come in and do this 2 times. So I'm starting off with a rectangle. I cut a little bit off the end because I really just want a rough square shape. And then I'm going to score down the middle here. Make sure that you don't use your cutting blade. This one has both the cutting and the scoring blade. So I cut the first little bit off the rectangle and then I scored both ways so that the lines are really nice. But honestly, you probably don't even need a scoring tool. You can just fold a piece of paper in 4, and as long as you kind of push down those score lines really well, it's going to work out just fine. So I have 2 pieces of paper here that are folded into 4, and as you can see, they are not even at all. So take a piece of square-ish paper, fold it into 4, and then the corner here that is kind of the main corner, the corner that has all the bits put together where there are no edges, and I'm going to take a heart die. Now I just had a look through my stash and kind of found a heart size that worked. I think this one tall wise is around 3.5 or so inches, and that's just because that's the size that I wanted to make my card today. Now I'm going to die cut through this, but you can see I'm leaving the bottom edge of the heart off the folds. So I am going to hold this down with a little bit of low tack tape. This one is the mint tape from scrapbook.com, and it has the perfect amount of tackiness, but you can see that the cutting blade is left off the edge down there. Now I do want to show you what might happen depending on the layers, the thickness of cardstock that you are using, because remember we're cutting through 4 layers here. So I'm going to run this through my little Cuttlebug. That's the die cutting machine that I have, and it is old, but it still works just fine. And I'm just going to run this through a couple of times to get the best kind of cut that I can. But you can see here when I take the die off that it actually didn't cut through all 4 layers perfectly well. That's okay. It cuts through, I find, for this thickness that I used, it cuts through 3 layers really well, and then the 4th one is kind of partially cut because that is a lot for it to ask to cut through. So you can see 3 layers cut really well, and then I've got this 4th layer here, and all I do is take my scissors and kind of, it's guided around that heart shape because it's kind of partially cut and there's kind of a dent that you can kind of follow. Now you could just freehand this, but you do want both of the hearts, both of the 4 pieces of paper of hearts are going to be the same size, and we want them to be the same so that they fold nicely. But I don't see any reason why you couldn't freehand one of the hearts and then trace it over top and cut out the second one with scissors as well. It just, I had a die that worked, and so that's what I used. So now you can see when you open these up, you have this kind of 4 little hearts coming out in all different directions. And this is what we are going to turn into a fun fold card. So you have 2 that are exactly the same there. Now I'm going to bring back in my scoring blade here, so not the trimmer, and I'm going to go directly from one heart right across the middle to the other heart. Now it doesn't matter which ones you would like to go on, but I'm just going to go from top to bottom, and I can line it up with the nice inside part of the heart there where it kind of dips down, and I'm just going to give that a really good score. Now I only need to go one way, and I'll show you why in just a minute, but I do need to do the exact same thing to the other heart, and it's really easy because these are symmetrical. I did notice that I have one of the rougher hearts that you kind of end up cutting a little bit. If that bothers you, you can kind of make sure that it is going to be one of the side hearts so that you can cover it up, because one of each of these 4 hearts is going to be covered up. So here is the part where we start putting it all together. Now I am going to kind of pre-fold these bits here. So the 2 that we just scored here are going to kind of fold in, and then it kind of folds down to create just the heart shape that we started off with, and then you can kind of see how that will open and close. So you need to do this to both pieces, and honestly, once you're kind of doing it in your hands, it's not that hard, and you'll kind of get the hang of it as you are going along. If you want to, you could do this with some copy paper and just practice first. Even if you just kind of rewind this video a couple of times, and you can see how they just pop in and fold down to be that same sized heart. And then this is the part where we can start gluing them together, because we want them to turn into one card. Now earlier on in the piece you heard me say that these hearts were around 3.5 inches tall. So the reason that I measured that is because I just need to cut out a couple of squares, and that is how I got that measurement. I just measured the hearts because I know that I want them to be covered. So that meant that I did a 2 3.5 by 3.5 inch squares. And again, so just measure whatever heart size that you end up having, and you may even want to go a millimeter or 2 a little bit bigger than what your actual heart measures, but have a play around, and if it's too big, just trim it down a little bit. But you are going to need 2 of these as well, and this is really just to kind of cover it up and keep things really neat. Now I feel like this is kind of a little bit hard because everything is in white here, so hopefully you can kind of see okay on film just exactly what parts I am gluing. I am making this for somebody to give to their husband, and I will explain that a little bit later on. But anyway, I'm going to unfold both of these cards and have kind of the fold lines going vertical, so you can see that they are going to layer up together, one on top of the other. So this is the way that I do this to make sure I've got it in the right place. I add a little bit of glue, just that little triangle there, and put one of the white squares on top of it. I don't want to go over top of any of the folds because otherwise the card won't fold in nicely, but you can see there that I've just gone exactly right inside that fold line. Then I'm flipping it over and I add the rest of the glue to make sure everything is glued down okay. So that first little corner that I do is just to make sure that I have it in the right place. Then I am just going to line up the other one. So I know the heart here that I'm going to use, and again I'm just going to put a little kind of corner of glue onto the inside of that heart there. Then flip this over so that this is going to line up nicely, so kind of got the back side of both of them. Now using the liquid glue here is really good because it gives you that wiggle time, but you want to make sure it dries really strong so that you are using a really strong glue. This is the Ranger Multi-Medium in the matte finish, and I pop it into these little bottles. I have a video on YouTube. If you search how to fill a glue bottle, you will find my video pop up, and that is exactly how I fill these little glue bottles. Then I take the other square that we cut out, add a little bit of glue on the back of that, and then cover up those 2 hearts so they end up kind of sandwiched in between those 2 squares. Then we have the base of our card ready to go. Now here is where I suggest kind of folding it all in and making sure that it all folds really nicely and that you have everything in the right place before you go ahead and decorate everything. There are lots of different options for decorating here. Now of course when you have hearts and you have different sizes, they kind of don't line up perfectly. That's kind of the nature of hearts. But from here with decorating, really the world is your oyster. This is where you can go ahead and use some inking. You could just ink up the edges of each of the hearts, or you can go ahead and use some paper, pattern paper. I'm going to do a little bit of that. The person that I am making this for wanted there to be lots of little places that she could write notes and that she could add some photos of them and lots of little things. So that also kind of guided me as to what size she wanted the hearts to be. This actually ends up being a 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch little square. So it is actually relatively small, but again, this is just the size that worked well for her. I am using the Honeybee Great Outdoors 6x6 paper pad here, and one little hint that if you don't think you are good at putting patterns together, what kind of goes together, then use the same papers from a paper pad, because it is likely that they will all end up matching and it's really hard to go wrong. That's pretty much what I did here. I just chose a few different patterns and I cut out a slightly smaller heart than I used for the original die cutting. I am going to score these hearts down the middle because these are the ones that are going to bend. These are on the fold lines, and I just wanted to make sure that they bent nicely, they folded nicely without cracking anywhere else. So again, I'm just using a little bit of liquid glue, making sure that the score line that I put on the smaller hearts matches up with the score line that is already in there when they fold. And then I have these two darker blue ones on the edges. Again, the world is your oyster when you are decorating this project. This was a super fun one to put together. I really enjoyed this. I did cut two of the larger hearts, the same that I used to create the actual folding base of the card, and I cut those out in the green, and then that way it covers the entire front. When we end up folding the card, they have those green ones on the front. And then I just cut out some smaller size squares so that everything has that same white border as the other hearts do around it. But she said she wanted to write a sneaky little message in here, so I ended up finding a way to do that by just adding a little score line here. And again, this just gives her a little bit more real estate to add little bits and pieces to this magical fun fold card. I add a tiny little score line to this piece, and then that is all I am going to add a little bit of liquid glue to. You could also add some double-sided tape here, anything that's nice and strong. Add that where I want it to go, and then push down that tiny little flap. So now this ends up being a little folding flap that she can add some more underneath there too. Again, just adds to kind of the fun of the card. So again, keep folding everything up and make sure that it all goes how you need it to go and kind of folds into place, and encourage those pattern papers. And then this is our finished fun fold card. I hope you enjoyed this one. It is super simple and I'm sure you have the supplies to be able to do it at home. Let me know in the comment section down below if this is something that you would give a go. I will have any supplies down in the description box below, but apart from that, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks, bye!